Hi everyone. Based on my birthday month, I am going to be talking about Sonia Nieto and her thoughts on multicultural education. So before I dive into the questions that we're going to answer, I wanted to quickly talk about who Sonia Nieto is, just so you all have a background of her. And she is a professor of language, literacy, and culture at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She is also the author of Affirming Diversity, and a little bit about her work is that it's intended to discuss common institutional practices such as racism, inequality, discrimination, and other forms of exclusion. So the first question I'm going to answer is, according to Nieto, what is culturally responsive education? And before I give you her definition, I wanted to say another quote that she wrote, and what that is: sometimes multicultural education is seen as something as little more than a way to promote self-esteem or simply as a curriculum that substitutes one set of heroes for another. So this is just a broad definition of what multicultural education can be seen as, and it's in her opinion it is much more than that. She defines culturally responsive education as an anti-racist education that is firmly related to student learning and permeates all other areas of schooling, meaning that it's culturally responsive education is intended to really get rid of things in education that are racist and harmful to students of color and different cultures and things like that. And it's involved in all areas of schooling. She also explains that CRE is a mindset, and it fully encapsulates and respects students' cultures and histories. Nieto explains that some things that she wants teachers to know. The first thing is themselves and their own histories. So in order to really understand your students and learn more about them, you really have to understand yourself and your own history and your own background and where you come from, what your culture is, and things like that. She also says that students should know more about their students, who they are, where they come from, and their interests. And lastly, their students' communities, where they come from, who's in their communities, what are their hopes and their dreams for their children, and things like that. So one of the examples that Nieto gives is that it's better for a teacher to read a history book about Puerto Rico rather than just learning and knowing specific traits or qualities of Puerto Ricans that may not always be true. So if you work in a school that has a lot of a larger Puerto Rico population, it's good to really dive into the history of the country itself and where they come from. She explains that people from Puerto Rico are often very proud of where they come from, yet there are more Puerto Ricans in the U.S. than there are in Puerto Rico itself. So why is that? And so it's good to know more about the country, especially when you're teaching students from that country. Some of the basic concrete examples that Nieto gives that teachers can do to be more culturally responsive are learn to say students' names correctly. I think this is a really good point and a really good example. I work in a school with a large population of students from Yemen who are Muslim, and their names can often be tricky to say, and so I often will ask them how they want it to be said. So, for example, I have a student in my class named Ahmed, Ahmed. At home, they call him Ahmed, but in school, I've heard a lot of teachers call him Ahmed. So I asked him that question. I said, what would you like to be called in school? And he preferred to be called Ahmed. So I think talking to students and hearing what they have to say is also very important. Also, labeling room with languages spoken by students. So this is something that I hadn't really thought of before. I do have a couple things in my classroom labeled, like the flag and the door and a couple other things, but those labels are in English, so I think it would be really good to have those labels in other languages as well. Also, having books and other materials that reflect the backgrounds of students in the classroom, so having a wide variety of cultures, disabilities, languages, and things like that represented in the books that you are providing for students. Also learning as much as you can about students and their histories, and also engaging respectfully in authentic family outreach, really being part of the community. This is something that I've tried to do before, as I don't live in the community where I teach. I live about 25 or 30 minutes away and didn't really know much about the area before I began teaching there. So I really tried to be part of the community, and I coach soccer in the community and attend events and things like that. Exploring how your curriculum can reflect the realities of all students. And lastly, what are some questions that teachers should ask according to Nieto? The first one is, who's taking calculus? This means, why are more white students taking higher-level courses that open doors for college and more advanced training? So a statistic that she gave is that 12% of white students take calculus, whereas only 6% of Black students take calculus. And the question we're asking is, why is that? Why are they given more opportunities for these higher-level courses? Next is, which class meets in the basement? Nieto discusses that there are a lot of ELL classes and special education classes that are often held in the basement or separated from the rest of the school in a modular, things like that. And why is that? Why are we separating these students from the rest of the population of the school? Next is, who's teaching the children? Meaning, why do teachers in poor urban schools often less experienced than teachers in primarily white middle-class schools? And lastly, how much are children worth? Why are schools with wealthier students paying more for their education than in low SES schools? So for each student, districts are given a set amount that they're able to spend on their student per year, and students that are from wealthier areas have a higher amount that is spent on them each year than those in low SES schools. So those are just some questions that Nieto states that teachers should ask. And yeah, that's just a little bit about Nieto's views on multicultural education. And here are my references as well.